Go Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Army of Revolution. The Iran war has gotten out of control, and the U.S. military is shocked, and Trump is terrified of defeat. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. We're the hardest working revolutionary in the business is back. They clipped my live from earlier, so I got to bring y'all some new information. Let's get right into the content. Salute, soldiers.
Tonight, the Iranian regime putting out video claiming to show its troops attacking and seizing commercial ships in the Strait of Hormuz. The images, set to music, show them masked and armed. Two ships were forced from the international waterway into Iranian waters, according to Iranian state media. All just hours after President Trump extended his ceasefire with Iran.
Iran has gone from having the most lethal navy in the Middle East to now acting like a bunch of pirates.
The president escalating pressure on the Iranian regime by also keeping a U.S. blockade on Iran's ports, costing the regime an estimated $435 million a day. The president saying in a new interview he feels no time pressure as he waits for Iran to return to talks.
They can't move oil in and out. They can't even pay their own people.
From Tehran tonight, NBC News reaching a former Iranian military commander with close links.
Now, remember I told y'all the other day they're lying when they tell you the Iranians can't move oil in and out because they think y'all don't know geography. They think y'all don't have a map. They think y'all can't look at a map and see that I told y'all there's such thing called the Caspian Sea. Russia has their hands on it. Iran, the U.S. not even allowed in the Caspian Sea. They can move all of the traffic and trade, all the goods they want through the Caspian Sea. Okay. They are not, then they got land routes. They can go to China, go to all kind of different places. This is more lies to the American people. Remember, we know behind closed doors, Trump yelling at people. He throwing stuff. He falling to pieces. He say he going to be Jimmy Carter. He can't believe it's going so bad. The generals won't give him the nuclear codes. He's a trap rat. He don't know what to do. This nonsense right here is just all smoke and mirror.
To the government, who says there will be no talks unless the U.S. blockade is lifted. Do you think there will be negotiations again here in Islamabad?
It depends the decision of the Trump. If they cancel the blockade of the Iran.
And he denies Iran's leadership is divided, telling me there are multiple ways to contact the new supreme leader who has not been seen publicly, including passing notes. It's been reported that it's hard to contact him, that communication is difficult. Is that true?
Yes.
President Trump's focus includes gaining an agreement that he argues is tougher than the nuclear deal President Obama got after 18 months negotiating with Iran, which placed limits on Iranian uranium enrichment for 15 years. The White House says Iran must agree to stop all enrichment.
Keir Simmons joins us now live from Pakistan. And Keir, you have some new reporting for our viewers about that shakeup at the Pentagon?
Tom, the Pentagon announcing that Secretary of the Navy John Phelan is departing the administration effective immediately. This is a civilian post appointed by the White House. Undersecretary Hung Kao will replace him. It's just the latest Pentagon shakeup. The Army Chief of Staff was fired early this month.
We thank you for watching. And remember,
The United States narrative on Iran is now facing serious credibility questions. While the Pentagon claims Tehran's military has been largely defeated after weeks of sustained strikes, new intelligence assessments tell a very different story, one that points to resilience, not collapse. A recent assessment by a Pentagon intelligence agency presented to US lawmakers reveals that Iran still retains substantial military strength. According to the findings, Tehran continues to possess thousands of missiles and one-way attack drones, core components of its deterrence strategy. The report goes further. More than half of Iran's Air Force assets remain intact. Its specialized naval fleet, critical in the Persian Gulf, has also largely survived. This directly contradicts earlier assertions by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, raising questions about whether Washington overstated the impact of its military campaign. The timing is critical. After weeks of joint US-Israeli operations, a fragile ceasefire, failed talks in Islamabad, and an ongoing naval blockade, the expectation was strategic degradation. Instead, intelligence suggests Iran has preserved much of its warfighting capability. The contradiction exposes a deeper fault line between...
Now remember, the U.S. has almost depleted its arsenal. Now the report come out, Iran has the majority of its arsenal. There's something not right about that.
In political messaging and battlefield reality. If Iran's core military assets remain operational, then the question is unavoidable. Has Washington misread the outcome of its own campaign, or simply misrepresented it?
With Iran, and according to experts...
All right, someone get Irony on the phone because she's going to want to hear this.
CNN has learned that the U.S. military has significantly depleted its stockpile of key missiles during the war with Iran. And according to experts, this reduction is so severe it has created a near-term risk of...
See, that's what that ceasefire BS is all about. And that's why Trump wanted to use nuclear weapons, because conventional war, they already lost. In almost a little over a month of shooting, the U.S. is out of their best missiles. They're down. They're critically low, not out. They still have a little bit. But if any war started with Russia or China, they would be defeated immediately. They wouldn't even be able to stay in the shooting war. Right now, if China said, you know what, we declare war with the U.S., it got to go nuclear or the U.S. would lose the first week.
Of the U.S. running out of ammunition should a future conflict arise in the next few years.
The United States, right, the country that spends more on its military than the next several countries combined, almost triple that of China, the country in second place.
Was talking shit like we didn't know we was talking about over here. You see, like General Cyril Sutin said, he's steadily telling those lies over there on his channel, and all them other bootlicking CIA operatives across the social media lying to black folks about what's going on. Just go to prove. When it comes to this geopolitical shit, these people, they're not in the same room as me.
Place, spending close to $1 trillion. Well, they may be running low on some of the exact weapons that it needs most. Yeah, you can't make this shit up. Let me tell you, the US military has significantly depleted its stockpile of key missiles during the war with Iran and created a, quote, near-term risk of running out of ammunition if a future conflict should arise. This is according to experts and 3 people familiar with recent internal Defense Department stockpile assessments. See, over the last 7 weeks of the war with Iran, the US military has used at least 45% of its stockpile of precision strike missiles, at least half of its inventory of THAAD missiles, which...
Now, since we know Iran still got a bunch of its equipment, we know they was hitting dummy missiles, like Iran said, inflatable missile launchers, like Iran said, painted planes on the ground, like the video. These people were using their state-of-the-art missiles to hit painted planes that was on the fucking ground. That's a fact.
Which are designed to intercept ballistic missiles, and nearly 50% of its stockpile of Patriot air defense interception missiles. All of this is according to new analysis conducted by the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Meaning, in layman's terms, yeah, the war with Iran has burned through US missile stockpiles, like Pete Hegseth burning through a 40 rack at the weekend. And it could take 4 to 5 years to replace some of those systems. Now, rest assured, they will, of course, because there's never a question of how will we pay for this when the conversation is about war. Just when it's about saving Americans' lives at home via better healthcare, or I don't know, feeding the poor.
Yeah, Brianna. So according to this new study by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, which was, their findings were confirmed by 3 sources familiar with recent Pentagon assessments of U.S. stockpiles, the U.S. is running dangerously low on some of these key munitions that would be required to confront a near-peer adversary in the short term, like China, for example. So while the U.S. does still have sufficient munitions to continue bombing Iran, for example, if the shaky ceasefire were to fall apart, if they were to need to confront an adversary like China or like Russia, for example, then that could pose significant problems for the United States. Now, just to give you an example of how much the U.S. stockpile has been depleted over the last 7+ weeks of war on Iran, according to this assessment and the sources that we spoke to, the U.S. military has expended at least 45% of its stockpile of precision strike missiles, at least half of its inventory of THAAD missiles, which are designed to intercept ballistic missiles, and nearly 50% of its stockpile of Patriot air defense interceptor missiles, which are, of course, very key air defense munitions. Now, the U.S. military has also expended approximately 30% of its Tomahawk missiles stockpile, which are those long-range munitions that are really key to attacking targets further away. More than 20% of its stockpile of long-range joint air-to-surface standoff missiles, and approximately 20% of its SM-3 and SM-6 missiles. Now, this is important because these munitions take a while to be replaced. And according to our sources and this analysis, it would take anywhere between 1 to 6 years to replace a lot of these munitions. And so this is a really big problem that we should note that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Dan Kane, he actually warned about as the administration was preparing to potentially go to war with Iran. He was raising concerns, we're told, about this issue of depleted stockpiles around the world, particularly ones that could be very useful to U.S. allies like Israel and Ukraine. So the Pentagon is preparing to ask for a supplemental from Congress for additional funding to try to replace these munitions, but it could still take quite some time before those are actually back in U.S. stockpiles, Brianna.
But according to the Wall Street Journal, this has been coming. I mean, they stated that the U.S. was, quote, rapidly expending air defense interceptions and straining its munitions supply during operations in Iran. And in a separate analysis, the journal warned that it was worse than you think. I mean, that's not coming from critics. That's coming from one of the most pro-defense, pro-establishment outfits in the country.
It's incredibly frustrating, Sean. And if the American people want the truth, they definitely should not pick up the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or watch CNN, especially these days in the midst of this incredibly successful military operation against Iran. It's almost like these legacy American media outlets were rooting for the Iranian regime over the American people, over our great United States military, because they are so rooted in their opposition to President Trump rather than seeking and reporting on the facts. The facts are the United States of America tonight have never been so close to making a truly good deal, unlike the horrific deal signed by Barack Hussein Obama, than we are right now. Why? Thanks to President Trump's brilliant negotiating tactics and thanks to the success of Operation Epic Fury, a mission that he launched after 47 years of Iran being at war with the United States of America and having presidents for 47 years who lacked the courage to do what President Trump finally had the courage to do.
But let's just take a step back here, right, and look at the very glaring contradiction here. The US, the largest defense budget in the world, the most advanced military technology in the world, the most expensive global presence, and yet it is still constrained by supply. And listen, while I am all for conversations about how to cut into the $1 trillion military budget to, I don't know, take care of people here at home, it is interesting that the red-blooded patriots aren't out here sounding the alarm on this matter, because doesn't this make the country less safe? I mean, experts have been clear, if another major conflict were to break out, God forbid it doesn't, the US could face serious constraints, all because this administration has dragged the country into a war without congressional approval, depleting ammunition over something that was sold as some short-term mission, but still has no end in sight.
It's going to be finished pretty quickly.
I do see a deal in Iran, yeah.
Mr. President.
Could be soon.
We are going to finish the job, and we're going to finish it very fast. We're getting very close.
I think it's close to over, yeah. I mean, I view it as very close to over.
I will say the war in Iran is going along swimmingly. We can do whatever we want. And it should be ending pretty soon.
And they said, wow, that's going to be bad. I said, yeah, it's going to hurt the market, and it's going to drive up the price of oil and whatever it is. But that's peanuts compared to what would happen if we let this happen. And I told them, 47 years other presidents wanted to do it. They never had the guts, the courage.
And by the way, where's Doge? I mean, how are we running out of weapons with $1 trillion budget? Where is that money going? And by the way, this fits a broader pattern that we've seen regarding this war when it comes to this administration. They declare victory early, escalate operations, burn through resources, then face potential long-term consequences.
They concern me, and for more reasons just than running out of ammo fighting Iran. Part of this is a math problem that we knew the answer for before this war started, right? We knew what our stockpiles were, and I used to work with the folks at the Defense Intelligence Agency who used to do their best to count how many missiles and drones Iran had. And so, like, there's really two things that I want to draw out of here. One is that the folks, politicians and experts who were advocating for war with Iran, they were just kind of detached from reality. We've run out of up to 50% of strategic defensive interceptors a month into a war with a regional power, right? This is Iran. And from that, we also got to kind of extrapolate folks who are advocating for war with China. That is a global power. The fact that we are totally unprepared for these conflicts is not an argument for us to gear up for war, but it should make us a little more introspective when we have people saying it's going to be a slam dunk and we really need to fight these wars. The other thing I want to pull out of this, I think, you could be watching this report about us running out of all these critical munitions and say, well, wait a minute, don't we have the most powerful military in the world? Don't we have the biggest military in the world? We just spent nearly $1 trillion on the Pentagon last year. Why don't we have enough ammo? And I think it's important for folks to understand, especially as we move into talking about supplemental funding or a new defense funding bill, that these hundreds of billions of dollars that Congress gives the president for war largely do not go into things that we would say we need for war. The reason that we don't have enough air defense interceptors is because instead we've been spending that money on like these big projects that are kind of designed to be expensive. Like I hate to describe it this way, but a lot of this $900 billion budget, and that's what Congress passed last year, nearly every Republican and over 50% of Democrats too, kind of becomes a slush fund for defense contractors. Raytheon, Lockheed, and instead of producing the defensive capabilities that you say we might need, instead of doing things like paying to get black mold out of the soldiers' barracks, instead of going towards getting better bomb shelters for the hundreds of U.S. troops who've been wounded in this war, we're building big vanity projects like the F-35 stealth fighter, which we learned pretty early on in this war is not that stealthy. Iran caught it on camera and shot at it, or like Ford-class aircraft carriers that the toilets don't work on. And so I think it's really important to understand, if you see these numbers and are shocked or worried by them, more money is not the answer.
And even now, by the way, the war is still ongoing, meaning stockpiles are still being used and replacement timelines stretch years into the future.
Love this video? Support independent media and unlock exclusive content, ad-free videos, and custom emojis by becoming a paid member of our YouTube.
Reversal that has exposed the utter bankruptcy of American military strategy and the growing desperation within the White House. Donald Trump has once again been forced to eat his own words. Just hours before his self-imposed 2-week ultimatum was set to expire, sending the region spiraling back into all-out war, the president blinked. He announced an indefinite extension of the so-called ceasefire with Iran.
Donald Trump says the United States is extending its ceasefire with Iran at the request of Pakistan while awaiting a unified proposal from Tehran, even as the U.S. military maintains its blockade of Iranian ports.
A major development in the war with Iran. President Trump says he's extending the ceasefire as peace talks appear to fall apart.
There you have it. The ceasefire is extended indefinitely at this moment. We don't know until when, and we do not know in what form the negotiations will take place. As a reminder, when I just spoke with you, we saw from Iran's state media that they said they are not going to go to Islamabad, Pakistan for those negotiations.
A move that reeks less of diplomacy and more of abject terror in the face of a resilient, unbreakable Tehran. This is not the behavior of a confident superpower dictating terms. This is the panicked retreat of a man trapped by his own reckless bluster, watching his war machine grind to a halt amid depleted arsenals and a domestic political landscape turning to ash beneath his feet. For days, Trump bellowed that the deadline was final, that he would certainly expect strikes to resume if Iran didn't kneel. But when the clock struck 0, the only thing that collapsed was the spine of the American president. Instead of the thunder of bombs, we heard the whimper of a truth social post extending the truce, supposedly at Pakistan's request, while his navy continues to illegally choke the Strait of Hormuz in a blockade that Tehran has rightfully called an act of war. This is a man who claims he wants a deal, yet he clings to a strangulation campaign that makes genuine negotiation impossible. The truth is far more sinister and far more humiliating for Washington. Trump isn't extending the ceasefire to give peace a chance. He's buying time for a massive naval buildup he hopes will save face, while simultaneously running scared of a war he knows he cannot win. And as we watched the sun set on this fraudulent pause in hostilities, the Iranian people and their military sent a message so clear that even the thickest skull in the White House must have felt it rattle. Before we dive deeper into the intricate chess game unfolding across the waters of the Persian Gulf and the streets of Iran, I need you to do something crucial. If you value the truth over Pentagon propaganda, and you want to see journalism that holds power to account without fear or favor, you need to hit that like button and share this video. The algorithm is designed to silence voices like ours, to drown out the reality of American failure with a flood of corporate media spin. Your engagement is the only way to overpower that machine. Drop a comment below. Even if it's just a dot, or better yet, tell us what you think this humiliating retreat means for the myth of American invincibility. And please subscribe to support honest, unflinching journalism. This is how we fight back against the warmongers and the liars. Now, let's get into the details of exactly how badly Trump has miscalculated and why the world is witnessing the spectacular unraveling of U.S. hegemony in real time. As the dust settles on Trump's panicked extension, a new and terrifyingly clear picture of American vulnerability is emerging from the Pentagon's own briefing rooms. While Trump plays tough guy on his failing social media platform, the U.S. military machine that he has recklessly thrown into a conflict with Iran is running on fumes. A bombshell report has revealed that the United States is facing a staggering ammunition crisis, a direct result of its failed 7-week bombing campaign against Iran. The numbers are nothing short of catastrophic for a nation that prides itself on global military dominance. According to a detailed analysis by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, American forces have squandered nearly half of their entire stockpile of Patriot air defense interceptors. Think about that for a moment. The missiles designed to protect U.S. bases and allies from Iranian retaliation are dangerously low, with more than 50% of the terminal high-altitude area defense, THAAD, interceptors also burned through. This is a military that has shot its bolt against a nation it couldn't defeat, and now it finds itself defensively hollowed out. The depletion extends far beyond defensive systems. Over 45% of the U.S. arsenal of precision strike missiles is gone, vaporized in failed attempts to permanently cripple Iranian underground facilities. Significant chunks of the Tomahawk, JASSM, and SM-36 missile inventories have been wiped out. The CSIS assessment, which mirrors classified Pentagon hand-wringing, warns that it will take 1 to 4 years just to replenish these stockpiles to pre-war levels, let alone prepare for a conflict with a peer adversary like China. This is the real reason Trump is extending the ceasefire. It's not about giving Iran a unified proposal. It's about his commanders telling him in no uncertain terms that they are running out of bullets and cannot afford to lose a single advanced aircraft over Iranian airspace. The fear of a humiliating shoot-down of an American stealth jet, or the inability to protect a carrier group from a saturation attack, has paralyzed the White House. Trump is trapped. He cannot win a war against Iran with empty magazines, and he is too scared to risk the political fallout of a clear, undeniable military defeat. If you need any more proof that American intelligence assessments are pure fiction and that Trump lives in a delusional fantasy world, look no further than the streets of Iran over the past 48 hours. Just as the ceasefire deadline approached, Iranian cities erupted, not in panic, but in a thunderous display of national defiance and overwhelming military readiness. In the heart of Tehran, at Engelab Square, massive crowds gathered, but they weren't there to beg for peace. They were there to witness the parade of a mobile launcher carrying a Khorram-Sharr-4 ballistic missile, a weapon system that Trump's Pentagon had repeatedly claimed was completely destroyed in earlier strikes. The images broadcast by Iranian state media were a devastating rebuttal to the lies coming out of Washington, and Tehran was just the tip of the iceberg. In Kerman and Arak and across multiple other cities, Iranian military forces rolled out their hardware for the world to see. The Ghadr and the K-Bar missiles, symbols of Iran's indigenous deterrent power, were paraded through the streets, flanked by armed personnel and surrounded by citizens waving flags and chanting, "Death to America." These aren't just empty metal tubes. These are the very same systems that can reach any U.S. base in the region, and they are out in the open, undamaged and operational. The imagery was accompanied by the raising of the red flags of revenge at prominent holy sites, a powerful cultural and religious signal that the nation is united and ready for the decisive battle that hardliners have been preparing for. The message from the rallies was unanimous and unequivocal. We do not trust America in any way, and no to the ceasefire. The Iranian people and their military are not exhausted or cowed by 7 weeks of American bombardment. According to U.S. intelligence reports that have finally seeped through the cracks of the propaganda machine, Iran has been using this ceasefire brilliantly, digging out missile stockpiles from fortified bunkers and restoring its launcher readiness to nearly 60% of pre-war levels, with a path to 70%. The narrative that Iran is on its knees is a complete and utter fabrication. They are standing tall, reloading, and waiting. And while Trump was busy spinning a fantasy about a non-existent Iranian navy and a pacified Strait of Hormuz, the reality of who truly controls the world's most vital energy artery came crashing down with the sound of gunfire. In a move that must have sent White House aides scrambling for their talking points, an Iranian military gunboat engaged a container ship in the Strait of Hormuz just hours after the indefinite ceasefire was declared. This was not a warning shot across the bow. According to the United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations, the Iranian vessel approached the ship 15 nautical miles northeast of Oman and, without any radio warning, opened fire directly on the vessel. The attack caused heavy damage to the bridge, a precision strike that demonstrates both the capability and the resolve of the Iranian armed forces to break the illegal U.S. naval blockade by any means necessary. Trump, the man who swaggered around claiming that American power had taken out the Iranian Navy, is now watching helplessly as his blockade is shattered, not by some grand naval fleet action, but by a single, agile gunboat operating with impunity in its own backyard. The claim that this attack happened after the vessel was informed it had permission to transit and that it ignored warnings from Iran's forces highlights the fundamental flaw in Washington's approach. They believe they can dictate terms in waters they do not control. Trump's delusion that the Iranian military had been neutralized is not just a lie. It is a dangerous lie that is now costing the shipping industry dearly and putting the lives of innocent civilian crews at risk. The fact that all crew members were reported safe is a testament to the precision and restraint of the Iranian forces, who could have easily sunk the vessel but chose to send a political message instead. The message is crystal clear. The Strait of Hormuz belongs to Iran. The blockade is dead. And every ship captain now knows that the only authority that guarantees safe passage in these waters flies the flag of the Islamic Republic of Iran, not the Stars and Stripes. As we look toward the coming days and weeks, the strategic picture for Washington is bleak and getting bleaker by the hour. The American naval buildup that Trump is using as a security blanket for his own anxiety is itself a massive gamble that could backfire catastrophically. The U.S. is currently attempting to amass a staggering 3 carrier strike groups in the CENTCOM area of responsibility. The USS Gerald R. Ford, fresh from a record-breaking deployment and a laundry fire that speaks volumes about the state of fleet readiness, has transited the Suez Canal. The USS Abraham Lincoln is already on station in the Arabian Sea. And in a move that reveals the sheer terror Washington has for the Yemeni armed forces, the USS George H.W. Bush is currently slinking around the Cape of Good Hope in Africa, taking the long way to the Middle East because it is too afraid to transit the Red Sea, where it would be a sitting duck for the missiles of the Yemeni resistance that have already proven their ability to shut down Israeli shipping. The pressure on Trump is not just coming from the seas and skies of the Middle East. It's also coming from the ballot box at home. The recent electoral drubbing his agenda took in Virginia was not just a local setback, it was a screaming warning siren. Voters in that key swing state sent a clear message that they have had enough of his foreign policy adventurism and his disastrous economic and military overreach. The Virginia result is a harbinger of the midterm tsunami that awaits him if this war drags on or, heaven forbid, escalates into a full-scale conflict where American bodies start coming home in bags. Trump knows this. He is, above all else, a creature of domestic political calculation. He saw the crowd sizes in Tehran and the missile launchers in Kerman, and he saw the election numbers in Virginia. And he knows which way the wind is blowing. He cannot afford to be the president who lost a war to Iran. He cannot afford to be the president who saw the U.S. Navy humiliated in the Strait of Hormuz. So, he delays. He postures. He extends ceasefires that nobody asked for, hoping against hope that the Iranian leadership will somehow fracture or that a unified proposal for surrender will magically appear. But the Iranian government is not fractured. It is more united than ever, buoyed by a population that sees this not as a conflict with America, but as a war of national survival against a predatory empire. The planned assassination or decapitation strike that some in Washington fantasize about, the well-hatched plan to lull Tehran with a ceasefire before striking, is a fool's errand. Iran has survived decades of such plots. Their security and intelligence apparatus is on high alert, and any such attempt would be met with a response so overwhelming it would make the current blockade look like a minor inconvenience. The coming days will likely see more of the same. More American bluster, more desperate attempts to enforce a failed blockade, and more Iranian resilience. The world is watching as the American empire, overextended, exhausted, and led by a coward, slowly chokes on its own lies. This is not the end of the war, but it is very clearly the beginning of the end of the American century. Stay tuned, stay vigilant, and never stop questioning the narratives they feed you.
Professor Said Marandi, the sage, the oracle, professor of English literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran, joins us now as he has so often in the course of the last few years, and always to very good effect. Professor, thanks for joining us again. On the face of it, this is an auspicious moment. If you believe that some unknown general in Pakistan is the reason why Trump has called an indefinite ceasefire, well, you definitely wouldn't be a student of yours or mine. I'm not sure who believes it, least of all the general or the field marshal in Pakistan. But he does say he's keeping up the blockade. Although the last time I looked, there's one hell of a lot of oil tankers evading that blockade. It's difficult to know whether to laugh or cry. What say you, Professor?
Well, George, it's a great honor always being on your show, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here right now, as I always am. You're right. It seems as if the Americans are unable to impose a blockade, and that large numbers of Iranian ships are moving back and forth. Meanwhile, because of the blockade, the Iranians have prevented the ships that were agreed upon to leave the Strait of the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz from doing so. So we had a ceasefire, and Netanyahu undermined the ceasefire by carrying out huge airstrikes, across Lebanon, carpet bombing, and killing hundreds of people within minutes, because this monster just wanted to wreck the ceasefire. And because of that, Iran said, well, if he's going to violate the ceasefire, which the Prime Minister of Pakistan acknowledged was a part of the ceasefire, then Iran is not going to allow the ships from these 5 countries that are considered to be hostile because they participated in the war against Iran: Kuwait, Bahrain, the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. Iran was supposed to, in accordance with this ceasefire, to allow some of the ships to get through. Then the Iranians said, well, as long as Netanyahu is not going to abide by the ceasefire, we're not letting any of these ships leave. So it took 10 days to force Netanyahu to accept the ceasefire, even though he's still killing people in Lebanon, just as he does in Gaza every day. But then the Iranians said, okay, the ceasefire's in place. We will now allow these ships, because the Strait of Hormuz was open. It was open to Iraqi ships, Chinese ships, Russian ships, and of course, Iranian ships. So the Iranians said, in accordance with our agreement, now that the ceasefire has been, obligations have been fulfilled, we'll allow the ships to go through. Then Trump said, fine, great, but I'm going to keep my siege on Iranian ports and the Persian Gulf in place. Because of that, Iran reversed its decision. So Trump and Netanyahu have for 2 weeks blocked the world from being able to get fuel, oil, LNG, and petrochemicals and fertilizers from the Persian Gulf. Whereas the Iranians, until just a few days ago, they were exporting and importing as usual. And for the last few days since the American siege, by all accounts, the Iranians continue to export and import. So U.S. policy is so foolish and so idiotic that they are harming the world, but they're failing to bring about the sort of harm that they want to impose on the Iranian people.
Now, he says that the Iranian government is fractured, and that that's one of the reasons why he's extending indefinitely the ceasefire. If any government were fractured, well, I'm thinking of all the Western governments right at this moment, and they all look pretty fractured, indeed broken to me. But to what extent is it true in Iran that the tensions, which have always existed, between different currents, different tendencies within the Islamic Revolution. To what extent is it true that this is causing governmental paralysis or even difficulties at all? What's the Iranian position on that?
Well, contrary to the narrative of the West, that Iran is this despotic regime, as they like to call it, where it's authoritarian and there are no alternative voices. In Iran, there's always debate and discussion. But in this case, the decision is made by the Supreme National Security Council, and a stamp of approval is given by the leader. The person that has been designated to take charge of the negotiations file is the Speaker of Parliament, the person who went to Pakistan to negotiate with Vance. So he has the authority, and he has the backing of the Supreme National Security Council.
Well, with all respect to you, as always, there remains. Unfortunately, I'm losing you, Professor. Can you still hear me?
Can you hear me now? Yes.
I can, yes. I just wanted to say, with all respect, the pattern or the picture does appear, at least to me, that there is a lack of clarity on the Iranian side on certain key aspects. It's not entirely clear to me that the Iranian government and its armed forces are going to extract a price from their neighboring treacherous regimes without whose participation the enormous damage that Iran has suffered could not have happened. These regimes are co-responsible for the terrible crimes that were committed over the last nearly 12 months and many years before that against Iran. Are you going to force them to pay for the damage done? I hear different stories about that. I think the delay has extended.
First, I just wanted to add something. And that is that, I was just going to say that in the claim that there are divisions in Tehran are that claim should be made about the United States, because during the negotiations in Islamabad, the Iranian delegation never made any phone calls to Tehran, but Vance was constantly making phone calls to Washington and to Netanyahu.
Yeah.
And Netanyahu himself said, Vance reported to me, just like other leaders report to me from Washington every day, which is an extraordinary statement. So it's clear that Vance did not have a mandate, but the Iranian Speaker of Parliament did. But with regards to what you said, the Iranians have made the decision. The Strait of Hormuz will be controlled by Iran, and the ships that pass through will have to pay a fee. Now, whether friendly countries pay a smaller fee and unfriendly countries pay a bigger fee, these are decisions that will have to be made. But already fees are being paid, except for in the last few days since Trump said he will keep the siege in place. But fees have been paid during the past few weeks.
So when they say that they have a blockade, this is an act of war, as you well know. As a matter of law, a blockade is an act of war. So to what extent is there a ceasefire if one side is openly boasting that they're committing acts of war?
Well, that is, of course, one of the very extraordinary things about the West in general. They wage wars, and then they complain about Iran controlling the Strait of Hormuz. I had a number of interviews with Western journalists, and they were claiming that Iran's control of the Strait of Hormuz is illegal. And I was saying to them, you should worry about the illegality of the war itself against Iran. But apparently that's not an issue for them. And so you're absolutely correct. The siege on Iranian ports is there to prevent Iran from importing food, medical supplies, medicine, or supplies for factories that produce medicine, and so on. Overwhelmingly, what comes in through the ports are for ordinary people. So obviously, Trump is targeting ordinary Iranians. But the problem is that Trump does not have a navy or a naval presence that is large enough to be able to impose that siege effectively. Now, whether that changes in the coming days or weeks, that's another issue. But the reality, George, is that every day that goes by, the global economic crisis becomes worse. Every day that goes by, this iceberg that we only see the tip of it is going to become more devastating and more deadly. And I don't know ultimately if Trump will restart the war in a few days or whether he will be seeking a way out, because it's Trump. And I have no ability in comprehending Trump. So
You're not a psychiatrist.
I cannot make any predictions. But exactly. And I'm not sure a psychiatrist can do that either with him. But I think that every day that goes by is going to get worse. So time is not on his side. Even if he brings in a third aircraft carrier and troops, the Iranians are also preparing themselves for war. And this time around, George, if Trump goes after Iran's critical infrastructure, meaning electricity, let's say, Iran is going to go after critical infrastructure in retaliation.
My name is Whitney Allen. I'm a widow, and my husband Ryan died when he was 35 years old.
Whether it's the Israeli regime or these Arab regimes in the Persian Gulf, the electrical power plants in the Persian Gulf, you know what the weather is going to be like in the Persian Gulf in 3, 4, 5 weeks from now. It will be hot and humid, and they will not be able to stay there. These countries would fall apart. Everyone will be forced to leave. So by engaging in such a war and striking Iranian electrical power plants, they will force Iran to retaliate. And that will bring an end to these regimes in the Persian Gulf.
Well, just as General Winter has always been a great ally of Russia, General Summer is definitely marching quickly onto the battlefield. The temperatures, the humidity, the total dependence on air conditioning in these Arab countries in the Gulf, the total dependence on desalination for water for ordinary people. If Trump does restart the war, it's going to create a massive refugee flow across the world. It's going to deepen the crisis of the availability of fuel, oil, and gas, and fertilizer, and the other things which are vital and come through the straits. So I hesitate to say this. I think it's looking like victory for Iran.
I think that Trump has already been defeated. The Israeli regime has already been defeated. By foolishly carrying out this war, they gave Iran the opportunity to take the Strait of Hormuz. And that changes the balance of power across the region and literally across the world. Now, I don't believe that the Americans are going to just walk away. They may actually restart the war and pursue a more deadly war than before. But it's not going to change the outcome. The United States cannot win this war. And if they engage in another war, I think it's only going to make the economic crisis much worse. and a global economic depression will be something that we'll have to deal with for many years to come. But whether he does so or not, the balance of power has shifted away from the West. And thanks to their own foolishness, it has enhanced Iran's position and all those countries who are having to deal with Western hegemony.
We'll call it a day there because the line is not great, but the discourse has.
are commonplace. Tragically, our government engages in preemptive war, otherwise known as aggression, with no.
Pepe Escobar joins us now. Pepe, always a pleasure. My
Cheers,
dear.
Judge.
Where did we find you? Where are you, Pepe?
Cheers from Buddhist, peaceful Southeast Asia, Bangkok.
Buddhist, peaceful Southeast Asia. Well, it's a pleasure, my dear friend. Thank you for accommodating my schedule. You have written extensively about the geographic significance and vitality of Iran as a connector to major powers. Will those three powers, Russia, China, India, allow Iran to fall to the Americans and the Israelis?
They can't, Judge, because Iran, just like in old Persian times, when Persian dynasties and, for instance, the Tang dynasty, they were doing business across Eurasia. There were middlemen in Sogdiana, meaning Samarkand and Bukhara. But they were trading among themselves for centuries. And today, still, Iran is the definitive crossroads of inter-Eurasia trade. So that's why these three extra BRICS, apart from Iran, full member of BRICS, Russia, China, and India, they are absolutely involved in having a functional Iranian state and economy because it's a key trading partner for all of them. And this is what I tried to explain in my latest relatively long article. The key is, I coined this expression 4 years ago, the war of connectivity corridors. Connectivity corridors, because this is the great geoeconomic project for Eurasia. To simplify, it's a very complex story.
Chris is putting up a map.
Wonderful. East to west. The Chinese New Silk Roads, Belt and Road Initiative, they have 6 or 7 different corridors going through from east, from Xinjiang in eastern China to west. They all go, almost all of them go through Iran. And only a little while ago, they finished the China-Iran Railway, which is part of their east-west corridor. There's another one called Middle Corridor. There's corridors through the Trans-Siberian. But this one is very, very important because it links Xinjiang in Western China through Central Asia, going to Turkmenistan, and then the Turkmenistan-Iranian border, crossing the border across Iran. And the key point is a dry port 20 kilometers only outside of Tehran. Yes, you can see it in the map. When you see Tehran,
That's a great map, Chris. So you now you can see how close India is. You can see this route to China. And if the map were just a little higher, you could draw a red line up to Moscow. Am I right?
Of course, Judge, because Iran is at the center of the International North-South Transportation Corridor, INSTC, which is Russia, Iran, and India. That was the documentary that we shot last year in Iran, which all of you, our audience, you can see it on the Press TV website. It was an immense honor for a foreigner. They gave me full access from the Caspian Sea to Bandar Abbas, to the Persian Gulf, to Chabahar in Sistan Balochistan, all the way to the Iran-Pakistani border. So this is the first documentary in English explaining to a global audience what is this connectivity corridor.
This red line is the railroad you're talking about, is it not?
This red line is basically, let's say, the classic Silk Road itinerary by rail from Xi'an in the east, across Xinjiang. You can see Urumqi here, the capital of Xinjiang. And then it goes through Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and it gets all the way to Turkmenistan, Ashgabat, capital of Turkmenistan, crosses the border and gets to this dry port that I was talking about, which is 20 kilometers outside of Tehran.
What is transported on that train line from
everything
from
Chinese,
Western Iran to Eastern China? What is on there?
Mostly what China exports to Central Asia and Iran, all sorts of manufactured products.
About he blockade.
Another thing that could start happening soon, and it's another parallel corridor for Iran, they can export oil through this railway as well. Of course, much less quantities, but it's also an oil corridor. They can use it as one of their backup oil corridors to China overland, and of course, immune to sanctions and immune to American blockades.
Are the Americans and Israelis aware of this?
They know most Americans don't know.
Or do they care, or do they want to disrupt?
If you ask anybody in Washington, Judge, about the INSTC, forget it. They have no clue what this is all about. Just like Trump didn't know what BRICS is all about. The ignorance in deciding circles in the U.S. about everything that is happening in Eurasia geoeconomically is staggering. They only know that the Russians have the Arctic Silk Road, as the Chinese call it. The Russians call it the Northern route, because, of course, Arctic, Siberia, and the Americans would like to be part of it. But that's about it. And this is the Russian new connectivity corridor. This column that I wrote is basically about columns involving Persian Gulf and Iran. And the two most important are east to west, horizontally, from China to Iran, and north to south from Moscow to Mumbai, the north-south corridor, which crosses Iran. When we were shooting last year, Judge, we crossed Iran on the road. We went to the Caspian, and then we came back via Tehran to Qom and Isfahan. We went all the way to Bandar Abbas, the port you can see on the map, and then we flew to Chabahar, which is a 40-minute flight, and then we were on the road again all the way to the Iran-Pakistani border. And very important for our audience, the Americans bombed the port of Bandar Anzali in the Caspian. They bombed Tehran. They bombed outside of Isfahan, and they bombed a military base in Chabahar port as well. Not to mention that they bombed a stretch of the Chinese-built and paid railway inside Iran.
So I go back to what I asked you earlier.
Yes.
Will Russia, China, and India allow Israel and the U.S. to eviscerate Iran? Doesn't appear that they have the ability to do it, but this is what they set out to do.
Is that absolutely not, Judge? Absolutely not, because this process of Eurasia integration is something that started in the 2000s, picked up speed in the 2010s, and picked up even faster, like driving a Maserati Turbo in the 2020s. So everybody is involved. These three BRICS, China, Russia, and India, their relationship with Iran, which is excellent, all three of them. Some are strategic partnerships, which is the case of Russia, Iran, and China, Iran. And of course, they know what the American design is. The American design is divide and rule in Eurasia so we can get a cut of something. They don't know exactly what it is.
Let me ask you about the red line with the dots in it going up through Eastern Europe, sort of almost along the Adriatic. Does that exist, or is that planned?
It does, Judge, because this is the connection between Tehran and Istanbul, the railway. This already exists. You can branch out to Baku as well. It's quite possible. You can branch out to Basra in southern Iraq, also possible. And of course, if you cross Anatolia, if you cross from Turkey, across Anatolia all the way to Istanbul, then you connect with the European railway grid. And further down from Vienna west all the way to, like the Chinese already do, the trains that, for instance, I was in Chongqing in China earlier this year. I was at the ground zero of the Silk Roads. The trains that leave Chongqing, they go all the way to Madrid in Spain.
Wow.
Some go to Rotterdam, some go to Hamburg. Most of them go to Madrid.
How long is that train ride? From China to Madrid?
15 days. I think it's 15 days, if I'm not mistaken. And because it's very easy now to leave China and enter Central Asia because the customs procedures are almost automatic. Okay. I went to this border a few years ago, the border of Xinjiang and Kazakhstan, and all the trains go through this border, and then they enter Central Asia, and they keep going west. And now they're streamlining all the procedures. So you can have a cargo manifesto going through customs everywhere, and it's homogenized. Extraordinary. Right. Another Chinese invention.
I wanted to set the table so the viewing audience would have an understanding of what's truly at stake here. So now let's go back to the war. Who presently controls the Strait of Hormuz?
110% the IRGC Navy. There's no question about that.
But wait a minute. According to President Trump, the Navy has been obliterated.
Okay, I prefer not even to comment on that because it's completely absurd. It's the IRGC Navy. The problem is the Americans, when they started their illegal, once again, a blockade, if you own a tanker, you have to think twice before crossing the Strait of Hormuz. Number one, you need to clear your passage. This means you need to present all the documents. You pay the toll, which can be in yuan or in crypto or in cash. If you have, they accept cash as well. Then you get a VHF radio signal, so you can leave the Strait of Hormuz. The problem is you're gonna meet the invincible American Armada when you reach the extremity of the Sea of Oman, already in the Arabian Sea, assuming they are there. In fact, most of them are not. Most of them are in the southern Indian Ocean, which is 700-800 kilometers down south in the Indian Ocean. So they have to calculate, okay, we're gonna pay for that, but what if we are confiscated by the Americans when we try to leave towards the Arabian Sea? So that's a very complicated calculation. And no wonder the costs for insuring tankers, they shot up 400% in the past few days.
Would anybody dare send a tanker full of oil in that area without insurance?
No, you can't. No, you can't. Absolutely. But the costs, of course, they add to what you're carrying. The problem, an extra problem. If you are an UAE tanker, the UAE is saying, we refuse to pay the toll boost to the Iranians. So nothing is leaving the UAE already. So once again, who pays the price? The global economy. Saudi Arabia, they are trying to divert everything to the Red Sea. So far, the Red Sea is open. if we enter the escalation trap, the Houthis and Sarala, the Yemeni armed forces, they will close the Bab al-Mandab. And then that's it. No more Saudi oil exports. So for the moment, we're having Iranian oil exports. So most of them are going through. In fact, these past few days, over 20 ships went through. It means they went across the American blockade. So we don't know exactly where the Americans are blockading and what are they blockading. So they have this Netflix, Hollywood, flashy operations. We intercepted a ship. Okay, but they intercepted coming from not leaving the Strait of Hormuz, not leaving Iran, but coming from the port of Gulan, which is in Zhuhai in southern China, not very far from Hong Kong, because in the American scheme of things, this is going to be full of sodium perchlorate for solid fuel for Iran ballistic missiles. We don't know if this is true or not. Trump said that we found some nasty, interesting stuff or whatever. We assume that he's referring to sodium perchlorate. And this was the reason why the Americans boarded this ship. But the ships who are leaving from Iranian ports, they are going through the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf of Oman, and they keep going. We don't know how effective is the American blockade. Nobody really knows.
What military gear, I'm using the word gear so as to cover everything, armaments, ammunition, systems that send the armaments out. What military gear is China selling to Iran?
Well, essentially that we really know is sodium perchlorate for solid fuel for Iran ballistic missiles. Apart from that, everything is speculation. There's no hard evidence from anywhere, much less from the Chinese. For the Chinese, it's a matter of national security. What we know for sure is satellite info 24/7, but this is, everybody knows since the beginning of the war, in fact.
The American blockade, or what they call a blockade, is truly out on the high seas. You said yourself 700 to 800 kilometers. That's about 500 miles.
Yes.
For those of us in the West that don't understand kilometers.
Yeah, south of the Iran-Pakistani coastline.
Right. Isn't the U.S. blockade by law and by treaty both an act of aggression and a war crime?
Completely. And let me quote here, Judge, what let me see where I put it in my article. Yes. The Article 3C of the UN General Assembly Resolution 3314, which it's the definition of aggression, essentially. I'm quoting, the blockade of ports or coasts of a state by the armed forces of another state qualifies as an act of aggression. So that's what it is. And this is what Arakshi, in his posts on X, has been saying again and again. And the key reason why there was no Islamabad 2. The Iranians would have gone to Islamabad 2 if there was no American blockade. This was debated at the Security Council at the highest level in Tehran. But with the blockade on, there's no point in going there. And on top of that, as Arakshi also posted, they are attacking our ships. So there's something extra, Judge, which is very, very important. Back to the Geneva Convention 1958 on territorial sea and contiguous zones, which was amplified by Iranian legislation in 1993. You stress the right of, between commas, innocent passage. So Iran can invoke the right of non-innocent passage because there are vessels, American vessels, that are threatening Iranian security. So they have the right to regulate the passage across the Strait of Hormuz, basically qualifying this non-innocent passage of possible American warships coming to the Strait of Hormuz. Of course, they won't, because if they do, they're going to be incinerated by anti-ship missiles all across the Persian Gulf coastline and the Sea of Oman coastline as well. That's why they're so far away. Yeah.
At the risk of getting too philosophical, does anybody care about war crimes anymore?
No, no, it's a very good question, Judge, because no, this is the empire of piracy. By definition, it's not only chaos, lies, plunder, it's piracy. And now the empire of blockades. And the blockade, they are already saying it out loud. It's going to be a global blockade. And it's not only Iran, that includes Russia. The Russians know how to read the fine print. This is blockading, trying to blockade Russia in the Black Sea, in the Baltics, in the Eastern Mediterranean, and blockading the Iranians, not only Persian Gulf and Sea of Oman and Arabian Sea, but as far as getting close to the Strait of Malacca, which means long-term blockading China out of the Strait of Malacca, which is what the Chinese have been thinking about 24/7 for 25 years.
Well, the Chinese are prepared to assure that the Strait of Malacca is open.
Of course they are, but a desperate empire in, I would say, midterm, they could try to pull off something in the Strait of Malacca. Don't forget, Judge, this is very, very worrying. And the Indonesians have not explained it at all. This is the military defense deal that their Ministry of Defense signed with the Hexet in Washington is so fishy that the Ministry of Foreign Relations in Jakarta told their own Ministry of Defense, what are you doing? We are a BRICS member. Are you thinking of giving overflight rights to the Americans here in the Strait of Malacca, which, by the way, everybody knows is being...
Looks like we're frozen for a minute. Okay.
Yes, I got you back. Yes.
Yes, you had your hand in the air and you're explaining the significance of Malacca.
I'm very near the American embassy. They are across the street here. They're building a monster, and obviously they interfere with our podcasts. There's no question about it.
Well, we are the resistance.
Exactly.
What was it you were explaining?
Yes. So this is Malacca. And obviously the Chinese, for the past 25 years, their whole diversification strategy in terms of sources of energy, they used to, the code name was escape from Malacca. But still, everything that comes from the Persian Gulf to China still goes through the Strait of Malacca and then to the South China Sea. So China is still partially hostage to the Strait of Malacca. And if the Americans know, they are already thinking of a global blockade. And the global blockade will be against China. So obviously the number one candidate will be, sooner or later, the Strait of Malacca.
Wow. I guess this means World War III.
Yes, that's the case. This is, look, finally, Judge, I decided I'm going to China next month. I was postponing this trip all the time because of the war. And my number one question, which I wonder if I'm going to get an answer, is, guys, when are you going to jump out of the fence that you're in? Because now you are being directly attacked as part of this American global blockade. It's against you, much more than against Iran. Are you going to send a task force to the Arabian Sea and the Gulf of Oman by any chance? What if they board one of your own tankers and not an Iranian tanker going to China? What if they board a Chinese tanker? What's going to be Beijing's response? So it's getting more dangerous by the minute.
Wow. Pepe, thank you very much. Great.
Yeah, somehow it's okay there, but man, just I mean, just let me just kind of start off just kind of at the 30,000-foot level. I mean, President Trump was on CNBC, I guess it was yesterday morning, and talking about how, you know what, they've agreed, Iran's agreed to everything. They're going to give us their reprocessed material. They're not going to do any more reprocessing, no more enrichment. And by the way, they've also promised me that they would never again use the Strait of Hormuz. All those things are done. So we'll probably have a deal. But I'm actually planning on resuming the war if they don't agree to it by midnight. So that's what he said in the morning. And then, you know, the whole, you know, what happened with the whole change of venue after that. What do you make of that? And we'll just keep it like about a 10-hour period on American policy.
Yeah, nobody's in control. This is like you're sitting in a plane and the plane starts vibrating and shaking, and you look up front to see who's sitting in the pilot's seat, and there's nobody there. I mean, this is genuinely frightening that Trump's mental decline is accelerating. His behavior is becoming more and more erratic. And, you know, you and I have been around long enough to have seen previous presidents that, regardless of their competence, they usually had control over the messaging. In other words, the administration had one message, and so there was not confusion about what was the intent of the United States. But we don't have that here. So, as you pointed out, on the one hand, Trump says, "Oh boy, a deal is imminent. The Iran has agreed to everything," and the Iranians say, "No, we haven't." Or they signed they got a ceasefire in place. And while that ceasefire is in place, Scott Bessent comes out and announces new sanctions on Iran, where one of Iran's 10 points in their 10-point paper was lifting sanctions. So instead of lifting sanctions and showing that you're cooperating with Iran, they do the exact opposite. So this kind of schizophrenic policy is, you know, I think at some point it goes beyond the boy that cried wolf. You know, he kept crying wolf, and finally the wolf shows up and nobody pays attention. I think other countries should just stop paying attention and are saying, you know, America's going to probably restart the war. We got to be ready. There is nothing that these countries can do that are going to satisfy Donald Trump. And Trump is not even listening to his own advisors. You know, based on that New York Times article from last week, where everybody but Pete Hegseth had advised against don't attack Iran. And what did he do? He attacked. He gave the order, attack Iran. So he's not even thinking. He's not thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead. Wall Street Journal tried to suggest that this was sort of a Roy Cohn, negotiating tactic, that Trump, act like you're insane. It's like Mel Gibson in the opening scene of the first Lethal Weapon movie, where, he starts sounding like the Three Stooges and smacking himself in the face and acting crazy. And Trump thinks that if he acts crazy like that, according to the Wall Street Journal, that will force concessions out of Iran, because they'll say, "Oh, don't disturb the crazy man. Let's give him what he wants." Well, that strategy is not working out. It's backfiring. It's having the exact opposite effect. The Iranians are taking him at his word. He's going to try to end our civilization, and we need to prepare accordingly. So, yeah, this is, and right now, I sent Gary the link that according to Channel 12, Israel's been informed that Trump's new deadline to Iran ends on Sunday. So, that's 5 days from now. That's in that 3 to 5 day window. And tell you what,
here's what Fox News is reporting today. The ceasefire extension will last only 3 to 5 days. A White House official confirmed to Fox. So that validates, I guess, whatever with Channel 12. Although, as Gary was showing us all, there's other Israeli media that seems to be showing something different. So I don't even know if that's clear.
Well, and see, there is the confusion. It's the ball of confusion, and so in that circumstance, if you're one of the recipients of this confused messaging, you got to assume the worst. So, okay, they're going to attack on Sunday, and you get prepared for it, and the markets start reacting, and then Taco Trump comes out and says, "Oh, never mind, we're going to have a further extension." Because when you step back and start saying, okay, what are the actual military options? There is no ground force option, no viable ground force option, unless you can explain to me how you're going to get a contingent, say 2,000 troops embedded in place anywhere in Iran, I mean. Can't do it. You know, if what are you going to jump them in with parachutes? Okay, that's going to take 22 C-130s. Okay, 20.
Oh man,
yeah, that's because a C-130 only holds 90 paratroopers with combat loads. So do the math. We have a total. I looked it up. We have a total of between 330 and 350 C-130. So essentially, we're talking about having to use almost 10%. You know, really, it's 8% of the entire force in order to deploy, and they are slow-moving aircraft, vulnerable to shoot down. So dropping paratroopers in somewhere, that doesn't make sense. You can do a special operations mission where, you know, one plane and one you know, small unit can conduct a raid, but then you got to figure out how the hell you're going to get them out of there. So there is no ground force option. There is no amphibious option because the straits are now thoroughly mined, and we wouldn't dare put one of those LHDs or LHA. They look like a small aircraft carrier through the strait. They'd be sunk in a heartbeat. So they have to stay offshore, far enough offshore, so they're not in range of the Iranian missiles. So that leaves us with air power, and in air power, we're dropping missiles and JASSMs and Tomahawks that we're running out of, as CNN reported. You know, and CNN is the most reliable news source, according to Donald Trump, because it gave him 100% approval rating among the MAGA crowd. But look, we're running out, and that they are actually, CNN is wrong in saying half of all THAAD interceptors are gone. Wrong, they're gone.
Well, I actually was going to ask you about that, because the next line there says Patriot missiles down nearly 50%.
50%. Yeah,
I think you were telling us you think your math and your calculation showed it was much worse than that, right?
It's got to be 90% down. I mean, we can't. You know, we know the numbers that have been produced since 2015, and I gave it the upside, the highest side, and you know, unless they're just not shooting the missiles off, which is like, you know, saying, hey, I got this beautiful car. I need to go to the store and get some groceries, but I'm going to walk because I don't want to get the car dirty or bother the car. Well, what's the purpose of having the car? And the same thing with Patriot missiles. Oh, we better not shoot at that incoming missile because then we're going to deplete our force. No, so here's China sitting back watching this proverbial shit show go on, and they're thinking, you know what? We can deplete the U.S. arsenal without having to fire a gun. We'll let Iran do it for us. We'll back Iran. We'll support Iran. We'll make the United States like, you know, Iran is Muhammad Ali with rope-a-dope, and the United States is Joe Frazier, and just going to punch himself out to the point that they literally deplete their Patriot THAAD batteries. They deplete Tomahawks. They deplete JASSMs. And then China's going, we don't really have anything to fear now. You know, the United States has depleted itself, and Russia the same way. I mean, they've got to be sitting there saying, are the Americans really this crazy?
Well, let me show you something here. You talked a little bit about this a second ago with President Trump. Let me just show you here in just the last little bit today. This is some of the things that he's posted. This is 2 hours ago. He posted the last season of his Apprentice ratings numbers from 2004. That's what he's posting about. He's, I don't know, living in some, you know, distant time there or something. Then he claims and says that thanks to him, the Iran has decided that they are not going to execute 8 women. Iran says, what are you talking about? There are no 8 women who are up. So he's claiming victory over something there that at least the Iranian side claims aren't even anything that were on the docket. Then he goes back again and says that because the Virginia voted last night in a very close election to basically do gerrymandering for the Democrats in response to Trump's pro-Republicans in the North Carolina and Texas. But this one has to be fake. So anytime he loses election, must have been rigged, et cetera. So he's back on that situation again. And let's see if I can get this other one. Earlier today, I think it was right before this. Let me scroll down here a little bit. Morning Glory, will President Trump go full Sherman in the war on Iran? And you find out that he's talking about the Sherman in the Civil War, where he marched to the sea and burned everything down. And you're like, what is this stream of consciousness stuff? I mean, it's one thing to say, oh, he's just crazy as a pejorative. But I mean, I think we got to really ask, is it a pejorative?
Oh, no, it's real. You know, in the past, you could make the case that, say 10 years ago, when Trump, or would go 8 years ago when he's in his first term, that he could use some bizarre tactics in negotiations, but there was always sort of a filter or a check. He did not use obscene language, vulgar language in public. He may have used it in private. You know, a lot of us do. You know, there's a way to speak in public and a way to speak in private. What happens, though, is when you lose that, you get actually diminished brain function, and you lose that filter. And all of a sudden, you're saying the things that you may have thought privately, but now you're blurting them out loud. He's doing that. And the evidence of this was his reaction first to Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massie, both who had supported Trump early on, and then his reaction to Candace Owens, to Tucker Carlson, to Alex Jones, to Riley Gaines, Megyn Kelly, the Pope, because it's a vicious personal attack, calling them stupid, calling them low IQ, not addressing the substance of what they were saying. In a particular, in Marjorie Taylor Greene's case, all she was saying was, Mr. President, you promised to divulge all the information on Jeffrey Epstein, not to hide it, not to protect it. And now you're covering it up. And on that, he attacked her as a traitor. And then when she says, hey, my kids are getting, you got to stop this. My kids are getting death threats. And he says, they deserve it. No empathy whatsoever. You know, so those are signs and symptoms. And then this confabulation. I'm sure he believes that 8 women that Iran has, suddenly pardoned 8 women, or, that was going to execute 8. It's completely made up, but he believes it in his mind. So that's the thing. You can't even tell reality from fakery.
And obviously that's incredibly dangerous when you got to try to figure out who's going to be calling war and peace issues. And apparently we just have this, Gary showed me, we got some breaking news from President Pezeshkian. Says the Islamic Republic of Iran has always welcomed and continues to welcome dialogue and agreement. Bad faith, siege, and threats are the main obstacles to genuine negotiation. The world is witnessing your hypocritical, empty talk and the contradiction between your claims and your actions. So if anybody is thinking in Trump world, or Trump himself, that these so-called crazy man threats that are going to cause the other side to capitulate are literally having the opposite effect. It is strengthening their resolve to stand firm. And now here's the latest one from Pezeshkian.
Well, in fact, we're seeing
millions of people aged 45 to 65 are missing out on $250,000 in life insurance just because they
I'll call it parallel policy. The United States is using the same tactics and techniques against Russia that they are against Iran, just slightly different themes. And let me give you a specific example. Within the last 2 or 3 days, we've been getting the message that, oh my God, the war with Ukraine it's a stalemate, and the Russian economy is collapsing. Okay, that's the message being put out. Now, it's not true. In fact, the Russian economy is doing pretty damn well with the higher price of oil. Then we get yesterday we saw with Trump's tweet that, oh, there's these incredible internal divisions in Iran, and until they sort those out, there won't be any negotiations. Whereas, and you just saw the message from Pezeshkian, he's saying what the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps is saying. There's no significant fracturing of inside Iran. So you got this wishful thinking propaganda that is being put out, I believe, by the CIA. They're driving sort of the messaging on that. Trump believes it. So he believes the lies that are being fed to him by his own intelligence organization, not able to draw the distinction between an information operation and what the genuine intelligence says. But the policies are being based upon false premises. And again, with Scott Bessent. Now, Scott Bessent reportedly doesn't have prefrontal lobal dementia, but for God's sake, he keeps insisting that, we've got epic turmoil, whatever they're calling the current economic war on Iran, and that it's going to break Iran's back, that it's going to collapse their currency, that they can't hang on much longer. And it's
yeah. But remember, that's the same guy that said he was going to out jujitsu the Iranians by taking sanctions off of them so that they could sell more oil at a higher price. So that's the brilliant guy we have there. Take that for with what it's worth.
Yeah, no, he thinks he's some sort of strategic thinker, and the guy's a clown. So Iran. Is Iran's economy having suffering somewhat? Yeah, but they've got options. It's called the Caspian Sea. They're open to the border with Russia. They've got Turkmenistan. That entire border's open. They got Pakistan. That border's open. They don't have to worry about something arriving by ship. It can all go over railroad or by road, conventional road with trucks. So, but the United States keeps selling itself on this nonsense that, we got them right where we want them. And we're the ones that keep shooting ourselves. We're the ones with limited options. And we keep imagining that we've got this, I forget which general was arguing yesterday. No, yeah, we just got to put like 10,000 troops into Iran. How the hell are you going to get them there? I mean, you remember what it was like at the assembly areas in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia.
Very clearly.
You weren't, you were maybe dodging a few Scud missiles, but the Scud missiles were not that effective at all. And the accuracy front that sucked. Well, today, tell me where you would put if you say, well, we got to have our assembly area outside the range of an Iranian ballistic missile. Okay, that means you're 2,000 miles away.
As a matter of fact, Larry, before the ceasefire went into effect, one of the last targets hit on the Saudi coast was at a port called Al Jubail, and that got my radar because I remember they were hitting, I think, some energy infrastructure there, and I remember that's where we debarked. That's where our ro-ro ships came off with our tanks and our armored personnel carriers and everything else, and that's where we got everything off. And I'm like, man, if we were trying to do that today, I mean, we'd come under a hail of missile fire that's accurate. So we couldn't do Desert Storm in the event of today. But you mentioned something about it a second ago about a general. Now, it's one thing if we're talking about President Trump, who clearly has reduced cognitive capacity and is deteriorating, I think, in an increasing pace. So you can say that's problematic. So then you might say, okay, well, those around the president who aren't suffering from that, they're probably going to be talking to him and trying to say, hey, sir, we got to do some things differently. One would think. Instead, here is General Keith Kellogg doing the opposite.
I think we need to finish it. And I think President Trump is really good about having an embargo, a blockade, to cut their economic lifeline. But I would even go a little bit further. I'm one of those that says, take some land. That doesn't mean you march on Tehran, but you can take Karg Island, which is 90% of their export of their oil. You can take the Strait Islands as well, like Larak, which is their command and control island, or Geisha. You have the capacity to do that, and then you control it.
Really, then you control it. I mean, Larry, this is not just some pundit. This is not just some talking head. This is a guy who was the national security advisor for the vice president in the first Trump and was the commander of the 82nd Airborne Division, is making these statements that is just like my jaw drops. As if I was a second lieutenant, I would go, wait, something doesn't sound right about that.
Yeah.
What do you say?
Again, how's he going to get the troops there, General? You know, we don't have a Star Trek teletransporter. So you're either going to drop them from the sky, or you're going to fly them in on a fixed-wing aircraft, land, and let them run off the back, or you're going to try an amphibious landing. Well, you know, the air defense systems in Iran are still intact. And just ask the pilot of that F-15 that got shot down near Isfahan, or the pilot of the A-10 that got shot down. I mean, the U.S. has lost something like 48 aircraft. So that was not just from shrapnel or from bird strikes. So, and then do the math. What size force is going to be required to take an island that I think the population on Karg is like 10 to 15,000. So, you know, are you going to need 2,000 troops to try to control 10,000 people? That might be a bit difficult. But as we, talked about earlier, 2,000 troops, you just do the math. You get 90 paratroopers on board a C-130. So you're up to about 22, 23 of those that have to go in. Yeah, it just, as you point out, it would be one thing for Donald Trump to be saying stupid stuff like this, because he doesn't really know better and he hasn't taken time to educate himself. But for God's sake, Keith Kellogg should know better. All I can assume is he spent too much time at altitude with no oxygen.
Yeah, but and that gets to the point though, that if these are the guys that have the ear of the president, and you can't accuse them of having frontal lobe problems. Right. I mean, that's just what they're thinking. You mentioned Bessent, you add him to that list. But the question is going to be, where is this going to go? And it's not just there, it's also in the media. Here's earlier today on Fox News with Jennifer Griffin and Harris Faulkner having a conversation.
President Trump's 3 to 5 day ceasefire deadline coincides with the arrival in the region of a third aircraft carrier strike group, the USS Bush, in the coming days. Harris.
Because you reported and reminded everybody that Iran never actually agreed to the ceasefire. So that's interesting because they accused the United States blockade in the Strait of Hormuz of being a violation of the ceasefire, but they expect it to be honored.
Well, the real question, Harris, is who is negotiating on behalf of Iran? Who is in charge there? And we really still are not clear at this point. The IRGC and the IRGC Navy does one thing, and their Speaker of Parliament says another thing to Pakistan. So it's very difficult to know what is actually happening and what is happening with the leadership of Iran right now.
You know what? Let's just look into that. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just said she keeps repeating that lie that, there's this big division. The IRGC is doing one thing, and Pezeshkian or the Galibaf is doing another, the Speaker of the Parliament. No, they're not. Just read the damn messages that come out from them. They're not contradictory at all.
But I even wanted to go a step further. Who cares? What does it matter if they have? I mean, I think you mentioned that Wall Street Journal and a couple of other New York Times have been assessing, what's been going on behind the scenes at various decision points in the Trump administration. And it always talks about, I think you even said it, Trump and Hegseth were on one side and the Vice President Vance and some others were on another. We have division inside. That's normal. That's the way it always worked. And yet there's this message that means something, that, oh my God, they're not unified. What does that have to do with the balance of power? What does it have to do with whether you can or can't take Karg Island, or can't open up the Strait of Hormuz by force? Why are we camping on that?
Yeah. Well, and again, what is accomplished by taking Karg Island? So the notion is, then we'll cut off Iran's ability to export oil. No, we won't. They got alternatives to that. So that's one where they're working on either bad intelligence or they're not listening to the intelligence analysis. I mean, either's quite possible. But it gets back to, what is the strategic objective? And is the goal to ensure that Iran does not build a nuclear weapon? Is that really our goal? And I argue, no, it's not. That we use the nuclear threat as an excuse to justify we want to destroy the Islamic Republic. And it's predicated on this mythology that Iran has been killing Americans for 46, 47 years and unrelenting. And, we didn't do anything to them. They just attacked us out of the blue. And it's like, what? And so, in fact, without naming, I'll tell you offline who I was having an exchange with, but a very prominent American politician, now retired, but who served in a very, very senior place within the Congress. And this gentleman was putting out information that claimed that the attack on the the U.S. embassies in East Africa in 1998, that those were carried out by Iran. And I said, no, that was Al Qaeda. Or the attack on Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia, that was the work of Iran. And I said, no. In fact, one of my good buddies, we were in the career trainee program together. He was the chief of base at Khobar Towers. It was blown up by Al Qaeda. And what was interesting is John Brennan was the chief of station in Riyadh. And my friend, he was the chief of base there, where in Jeddah, and Brennan restricted any CIA collection on Saudis that were involved with terrorism. Let me repeat that. John Brennan prohibited my friend and the other CIA officers that were in country from developing any information about Saudi links to Al Qaeda and terrorism. And so, but my point is, all these lies and information keep getting put out there. And so it's not entirely, I guess it's easy to blame Trump for the mental lapses. But listen, when you're also being fed a steady diet of horse manure, well, it's not your fault that you start neighing, and he's not being well served by his national security advisors. He needs to tell some of these people just to go away, leave him alone. He needs the truth, but he's not getting it.
And so then, if we're talking about how we're going to make a decision where we're going to go now, whether it's 3 to 5 days, we're going to go back to conflict, whether we're going to try something else negotiating, whether we're going to try to just outlast Iran. I mean, where are we going to go from here? And even before I get that to you, there's one more soundbite I want to show you here from another so-called expert on Fox News this morning that kind of was talking about this whole issue of the who's in charge thing. But listen to his suggestions.
I do think there's a real factional division, and that the RGC dominated leadership right now believes that time is on their side. They think they can absorb the costs better than we can absorb the costs. And at this point, they feel if they hold out, they will have to give up less in these negotiations. So I think at this point, it's a test of us. The right answer to that test is to preserve the blockade. The blockade is an answer to what they're doing in terms of trying to exert their leverage over the Strait of Hormuz. Let's not underestimate the impact of a leadership dominated by those who are really ideological and who think that any concession at this point actually detracts from that ideology and reduces the following they have among those who are also the most ideologically committed.
I wasn't clear on that last part. He was talking about Benjamin Netanyahu or somebody in Iran because, that ideological thing. But let's look at the premise of what he's suggesting there. He's suggesting that we can outlast Iran. I think that even if you gave poor marks to the Iranian side and their stamina, which is not good based on history, but let's just say that you did and say that they could only make it 3 or 4 months. And, a blockade then would bring them to their knees. Let's say that you believe that was true. Yeah. We can't last 3 or 4 months with the strait being closed here. And yet that seems to be what people are talking. Here's just one example. This is from today. And here comes the food inflation. Costs for food companies jumped 7.9% year over year in March. And this is basically just from the higher fuel costs. We're still waiting for the impact of higher fertilizers, et cetera. Ergo, every month this thing goes on, those numbers keep going up because the price of fuel keeps going up, and the amount of petroleum products that are made, that are used in the feedstocks, are also going down. How can we have a course of action, Larry, that doesn't have anything other than like a week or so as a time frame?
Yeah. Well, first, when I saw Dennis, I was laughing. I kicked his ass. Well, okay. Well, so back when my son was
like George Foreman kind of version?
It was indirect. It was through baseball teams. So he and a guy named Neil Kerwin, who was the president of American University, they had this little league team. The boys aged 10 to 12, and so my son and my nephew, I became the manager of the team. And so in our third year, the first year we played, we were the Bad News Bears, but we lost every game. The third year, we won the championship and we beat their team. Now, their team had been together since, these kids had been together since they were 6 years old. They were now 12. They've been together for 6 years. So that's right. I defeated Dennis Ross. And you know what? Dennis Ross is as good a political analyst as he was a manager of a baseball team, okay? So what he said is just nonsense. What has been exposed in the course of this war is the limits of U.S. military power. It's one thing to sit and say, oh, we're the most powerful military in the world. How many hypersonic missiles do we have? Well, that'd be none. Iran has some, and China has some, and Russia certainly has some, but we have none. Oh, okay. So the great power. We're dependent upon aircraft carriers, which really were built for the 20th century warfare, not for 21st century warfare, because they can't avoid the missiles, the hypersonic missiles. And the hypersonic have the advantage; they can be steered and maneuvered, or the cruise missiles that are now available. All of this was, I call them. These are the modern day kamikaze aircraft with no pilots. The United States got the preview at the end of World War II of what the future was going to be like for aircraft carriers. If you've got an aircraft of some sort, it can carry an explosive and can hit you without having to kill a pilot, you got problems. And no amount of air defense is going to protect those aircraft. So, across the board, we've exposed the weakness of the U.S., including our production capability. We're running out. We are severely depleting, draining stocks of entire classes of weapons, and pretending that this war with Iran is going to be over in a week or two. It's not. And we can keep feeding ourselves these lies that, there's great division. There's great division in Iran. They lack popularity. People that say that forget that during the American Revolution in 1776, what percentage of American colonists supported that war at the time? 40%. Okay? 40 to 45%. There's another 20% that didn't care one way or the other, and the rest were solidly on Britain's side. So I'm just using that as an illustration that we set the standard of, if we can just get a majority of the people with us, they won't stand. No, we've already proved that even a strong, committed minority can rule a country, but that's not the case with Iran. Iran is actually more united now than it has ever been in its 46, 47-year history, because they were attacked in a cowardly fashion from the outside that murdered children. And that, Americans who still have a memory of 9/11 remember how outraged we were by what we viewed as a cowardly, unprovoked attack. The anger that brought Americans together. Iran's experiencing the same damn thing. And yet we foolishly pretend, they don't have emotions like us.
I thought it was really telling last night in Tehran, before it was announced that President Trump had extended the ceasefire, there was basically a parade in Tehran with missile launchers out there and people with flags and stuff all draped around it, knowing that, you know, satellite technology would be able to see that, and it was a risk of it being attacked, and the people didn't care. They're out there, you know, in support of their side.
Yeah.
So that didn't think exactly they were protesting to overthrow the regime.
Yeah, they weren't cheering to say, "Oh, good, the ceasefire is extended." No, they weren't cheering for that. They were cheering initially because they thought the ceasefire was over.
Yeah,
yeah.
That was before.
And they're willing to continue fighting. We've entered new territory now, and we're still trying to use the old math that applied, you know, for 20th century and not the 21st century. And again, we fail to understand Iran. We've convinced ourselves that the Iranians killed 45,000 protesters. The actual Iranian number is down around 3,500, and not all of those were protesters. A lot of those were people that were shot and killed by elements that were armed by the CIA, as Trump admitted it.
Trump himself admitted, yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, Iran has faced, they faced subversion, they faced an attack, and they're reacting as any normal country would in those circumstances. In the United States, we labor under this delusion because we've actually never really been attacked here in the United States in any significant way. And I include 9/11 on that. That was, you know, less than 4,000 dead. Well, that's a tragedy, but that wasn't, you know, we weren't seeing massive attacks across the country at all.
Yeah. Well, so where do we go from here? Because we've seen that the first 40 days of this war burned up all that stuff. And even if you just say, okay, well, not that one, sorry. This one, even if you accepted these numbers at face value and said that we've used up 45% of this, half that, 30% of this, out of 40 days. So if we then say, okay, if we're going to restart it like General Kellogg wants to do, and you're going to go after whatever target set, and then what are you going to do in another 40 days when now then you've nearly burned through all of that? You're having to use now PAC-2s and older versions of stuff which are even less capable, other missiles that we have a lot of, but then they're going to require you to get closer to the target. It's going to make you more susceptible, and it's going to have less power. And if the first 40 days didn't compel them, what are we going to do in the second 40 days? And now then you're talking about another 2 months by the time this would be over, of all those prices starting to go up even more, and the shortages accelerate and deepen on that. What is the point of where can we go? Because this stuff is out there in the open, and who is surrounding President Trump, and with his state of mind, where do you think this goes?
Yeah, it's going to hinge largely, I think, on the, if you will, the stock market and the commodities market. They continue to indulge in this fantastical thinking that the war is actually almost over, that Trump is in command, that there's no way that Iran can win. And so let's break it. You've got the military and the economic dimension. On the military side, the United States is going to launch attacks, and this time, highly likely that there are going to be more American aircraft shot down inside Iran, and that there will then be American military personnel held as POWs. And that alone is going to ramp up dramatically pressure on Trump because it's like a reprise of the Iranian hostage crisis that seized America from the fall of 1979 until January 21st of 1981, when all the American hostages were released. So you've got that dynamic. You're going to see the dynamic of the U.S. attacks not having the dramatic effect that Trump is promising, that it's not going to break Iran, that it's going to redouble Iran's commitment to fighting back. And while the United States like to pretend that it's going to be delivering great blows to Iran, Iran is going to be hitting America and Israel. And Israel is not in a position to take the kind of pounding that it will get. Iran has vowed that it's going to do more and do it on a far more extensive level. So then Trump will be faced with the reality that he doesn't have an escalate. Yeah, can he go to a nuke? Well, that brings in too many other issues with the Russians, the Chinese, the Pakistanis, the North Koreans. That can get completely out of control. So he's going to be frustrated on the military side. And meanwhile, the economic, in fact, as you noted, this inflation is going to continue to shoot up, and it's going to accelerate. Just yesterday, Kazakhstan announced it's cutting off its oil flow to Europe, Germany in particular. Well, that's a significant portion of German fuel. They've got, they got 9 days until that goes away. On May 8 days, it goes away on May 1st. So what are they going to do? It's not like there's an abundance of oil out there, because 20% of the world's oil is now gone, or it's bottled up in the Persian Gulf. So that whole economic cascade, it's going to be like the start of a tsunami. Initially at the tsunami, the water draws back. Oh, the beach is open. Look, everything's calm. And then all of a sudden, here comes the wave, and people can't outrun it. And that's what's going to happen. That's what's going to happen.
Let's take a look at what is happening right there. This is 2 hours ago. The parliament member Galibaf, who is also their chief negotiator, he just posted this: a complete ceasefire only makes sense if it is not violated by the maritime blockade and the hostage shaking of the world's economy, and if the Zionist warmongering across all fronts is halted. Reopening the Strait of Hormuz is impossible with such a flagrant breach of ceasefire. They did not achieve their goals through military aggression, nor will they through bullying. The only way forward is to recognize the rights of the Iranian nation. Now, Larry, they can make those kinds of claims right now. They can do math. They can see that report by CNN. Not that they needed it. They got intelligence that they can get it on their own. But they realize the dearth of capability that we have, because ultimately it doesn't make any difference how many aircraft carriers, ships, destroyers, F-35s, F-22s, all that stuff. It doesn't make any difference how many of those you have. It matters how many weapons you have. It matters how many missiles. And when you don't have missiles for them, they're useless. They're paperweights.
Yeah.
And we're running short on that to fight a war. Iran, on the other hand, has the strait in their hand. And there's nothing you can do to force it out of it. And they don't like what's going on, but they can go on for months like this. There's every reason to think that they can. We can't. So at some point, doesn't the president or those around him have to recognize that if we keep going down this fictitious road here, we're literally going to drive into the rocks?
It ultimately hinged, I believe, on John Ratcliffe, lesser extent Tulsi. Sadly, Tulsi's been, she's been a non-entity throughout this, and they're excluding her from meetings. But the intelligence, Ratcliffe is the one who can finally come in with Kane. And I was told yesterday by a mutual friend of ours who's connected into that whole atmosphere that Kane and Ratcliffe are becoming increasingly concerned about Trump and his behavior, and how is narrowing the options for the United States and putting the United States at risk. So those two could actually come in and finally try to make an issue of it that would stop Trump from doing some of these things that could really worsen the situation for the United States, and then make it clear that, hey, and some of this has started coming out. There's a report out today about the CIA is preparing a report saying, look, Iran is actually stronger militarily than we thought. That was, and they've got more weapons than we thought, and they've been able to restock some of the missiles that they fired. They're producing, they're manufacturing them during the last 2 weeks. Their underground missile cities are being quite efficient at that. So, that's a sign that they're finally putting the intelligence in front of the Congress. That's not going to pull any punches, and we'll actually say this is how bad it is, and that despite all of Trump's fanciful claims, if those two make that argument in private with Trump, he may ultimately have to concede. But again, the problem is his erratic behavior. He could start blowing up and yelling at them that he's undermining, and you saw this. He came out with that crazy message citing how many, how long the wars went on for World War I and World War II. Well, what he forgot to mention in there is that 20-year war in Afghanistan. God, who was president for 4 of those years? Let's see. Let me think. Oh, yeah, that'd be Donald Trump. So why didn't he end that war? Now, reportedly, he tried and was betrayed.
Yeah, but he didn't succeed.
Yeah, but he didn't succeed.
He was the president. He didn't have to. It wasn't like he couldn't do it. He chose not to. And I know that because Doug McGregor had the order in his hand to bring it to an end on his watch, and Trump allowed himself to be talked out of it. But I digress.
No, but that's the point. So Trump has no accountability, no responsibility. It's everybody else is being unfair to him. He's the victim, and meanwhile he is leading America. I think the analogy is you're on the Titanic, and you can see the iceberg, and you ain't slowing down. So we're going to run full tilt into it.
So let me ask you in the last few minutes we got here, given all of this that you talked about on both the Iranian side and the American side, the good, the bad, the ugly, the limitations, the capabilities, all that stuff, where we are right now, given where, especially what I just showed you, what the Iranian negotiating position is and their entry level to even get into a sustained ceasefire, what will America have to do? What is the best case scenario right now? What kind of terms for us to get this war off the table?
Trump hinted at it when he talked about how the JCPOA, he's going to do something better than the JCPOA. And the fact is, if they try to make it, let's make this all about getting a firm commitment from Iran that they're never going to build a nuclear weapon, and we're going to have the inspection procedures in place. If he can get that deal. Now, that said, and I posted at Sonar 21 last night just a recap of the original JCPOA from 2015. It took 18 months to negotiate that. And I mean, it got into nitty-gritty details about which nuclear plants and sites in Iran could operate, what kind of inspections were going to be done, what kind of enrichment level that Iran would be allowed to do, what sanctions, a very complicated agreement. Trump could get one of those. And the biggest problem with the JCPOA, if you want to say it was a problem, was it was capped at 10 years. It was not like a permanent agreement. So the big change where Trump could claim victory is say, hey, I've got a permanent agreement. We'll reactivate JCPOA with some adjustments that Iran's going to demand all of the sanctions off now. We're not going to wait. We're not going to be phased in. They're off now. We'll agree to this permanent. Then he could claim a victory. I prevented Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. That'd be his way to walk away from victory. But that's going to leave Israel hanging, and there's the problem.
Well, hang on before you even get to the Israel. The Iranians said, "No way, shape, or hell are we walking away without control of the strait." So how's he going to square that one?
Well, he just said, well, they suffered damage, so that yes, the strait will be the way that they recover the money that for the damage they incurred. Yeah, he can,
he can just say that.
Yeah, he can lie about. He's lied about everything else. Well, why not lie about that?
Certainly in his toolkit there, he's got that tactic.
Yeah. So
so to the Israeli side though.
Well, and the Israeli side though, they're going to be furious, but they've been slowly committing suicide this week, or not slowly, rapidly. That image, so the Zionist hatred of Christians has been well established. There are ample YouTube videos showing these ultra-Orthodox Jews spitting on Christians coming out of churches, children spitting on Christians. Then you had the Easter, Palm Sunday and Easter blockade of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where Israel closed that down, and that elicited protests. But finally, the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back was the video of that Israeli soldier using a sledgehammer on a statue symbolizing the crucifixion of Jesus. I called it Jew on Jew violence because, Jesus was a Jew And here's this modern day Jew, clubbing Jesus. Well, you know what?
Not good imagery.
That set off some alarm bells finally across the Christian world, even some who had been ardent defenders of Israel. And man, did Bibi Netanyahu jump to, oh no, we love Christians. Oh, really? Go look at let's look. Islam says that Jesus is a holy prophet. What do you guys say? Jesus was a nobody. The Muslims say that Mary, the mother of Jesus, she's a holy woman. What do you guys say? Oh, your Talmud says she's a whore. Oh, so maybe there's something to this visceral hatred of Christians. And man, Netanyahu is, we're putting those two guys, they're on leave for 30 days. Oh, there's punishment. Let me see if I get this straight. You're going to take me off the front line where I'm getting shot at and possibly blown up, and I get to go home for 30 days for vacation? Oh, yes, please. The pain. I mean, come on.
Okay, so there's a lot of headwinds, bottom line, to your best case scenario. Now, what is your most likely case scenario? What do you think Trump is going to do in the near term? Let's just say in the next 3 weeks.
Yeah, he will authorize this. They got the plan. The plan's been in place for, a month at least. This massive bombing campaign. They're going after infrastructure, power centers. But Iran also gets a vote as soon as the United States launches that. Because, Iran's being very careful not to take any kind of military action where they would be blamed as breaking the ceasefire. They're doing that out of respect to Pakistan and out of respect to China.
And by the way, Professor Morandi just told me right before your show here that Iran would not break the ceasefire. They would not be the one to do it.
Yeah. So they're and even though the way the West is portraying that the capture of they boarded now 2 ships, but reportedly 30 others have gotten through the blockade. So I think Iran's standpoint is they'll protest that. They'll put that in the memory box to be dealt with later, but they're not going to react militarily to that. But when this attack starts, they're going to fire off, and there's at least one military base in an Air Force base in United Arab Emirates, and then Ali Jabal, the port, which is also a large free trade zone. You got Al Udeid in Qatar. You've got 2 different bases in Saudi Arabia. You got 5 in Kuwait. All of those are going to be hit again and again and again, and Israel's going to be hit. And they'll take out the power center in Israel so that they too they'll suffer the same fate as Iran is supposed to suffer. The difference is Iran's got a much more decentralized system. Israel's is much more centralized. And a point that I know that Professor Morandi has raised, and I'd raised it too, is when you're hitting mid-May in Qatar, it's hot as a pizza oven.
Yeah,
I mean, I was there on May 20th of 2006, and I couldn't believe how hot it was. And then you get the sandstorms coming in. That's always fun. So when if the power centers are out, if there's no real electricity available, those cities in Saudi Arabia and Qatar and United Arab Emirates, they're going to have to abandon them.
And and I've got some personal experience of that. When during Desert Storm, we arrived on station, and I want to say this was the 5th of December, 1990. And then, of course, you had the 100-Day War, whatever. And then it took us time to get everything in order to get rolled back out through the same ports, et cetera. We left in around the middle of April, and there was actually time when there was frost on some of our tanks in the February, March period of time there. But man, by the time we were leaving there, it was an oven, and that's in April.
Yeah. No, I mean, so the weather becomes a factor, and that also actually affects aircraft maintenance and the performance, both of helicopters and fixed wing. I mean, these things, again, if you're doing planning you need to take that into account. And I think some of our planning sucks. we haven't really thought that through fully, but the Iranians have it. And Iran's not going to be affected the same. As Professor Morandi will tell you, he can sit in his home, look out through the window and see the mountains in the background that are snow covered. So, you're not dealing with 60 degrees Celsius or 120 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. It is, and that's, I will say though, funny story. I was there at Al Udeid and came out of the dining facility, and they actually had a Burger King food truck there, and I thought, oh man, I'd like a Burger King. And looked over, there was the facility, the recreational facility, and next to it they'd built a miniature golf course. Now this was like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 120 degrees, and there were 4 young soldiers out there playing mini golf. And I said, man, those are some hard lads.
Yeah. Well, listen, man, it's not a very positive looking thing, because, man, if we do what you suggest, and if Trump eventually, whether it's Sunday or sometime before or even after that, goes back to any version of military, if he listens to General Keith Kellogg, all we're going to be doing is just moving the potential date for this resolution off into the distant future. Correct. And all of those problems financially, economically, oil, gas, the fertilizers, all that is just going to continue compounding up. And I don't know how we get out. I don't know how he gets out of this one.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's if he was surrounded by people trying to talk him out of it, it'd be one thing. But when you've got Jack Keane calling him up and
Graham,
Kellogg Cornflake doing it, and Lindsey Graham, and they're all,
Mark Levin apparently is another.
Oh yeah,
he's definitely saying, yes, we should definitely go and finish the job off like Patton did in the Third Army. He said that a couple of days ago too. So those are all the guys that have presidents here. But
yeah, and
he needs to have you. See if we can get you in there, and maybe we can get him some sense talked into him.
He wouldn't like what I have to say.
Yeah, but I would.
Yeah, that's true.
So would all the soldiers out at the sea. And in fact, I know we're just about out of time. Just real briefly, because I know you have some context. What do our troops at the front lines of this, when they see all of this back and forth and weird stuff coming out of Washington, D.C., what is their morale like?
Yeah, actually, let me just read a message from one of my friends who is embedded, and I was asking him. I said, that Iran, I said, Iran's certainly not going to entertain any talks until this blockade is removed and sanctions are lifted. And he wrote me back. He said, me and the boys don't really give a shit. This thing wasn't popular to begin with, and it's turning south real fast. Everyone is pissed. Morale is in the shitter. Seems like no one in the box office is in charge or has any idea what the fuck is going on. So I'd say morale is pretty good.
I mean, let's just cut to the chase. Yeah. It's hard to imagine how it could be any different. I mean, I'll just tell you, I know we're about at the end of the time here. One of the things that during our Desert Storm time especially, we knew we had everybody's support. That we had UNSC authorization. The Congress had weighed in on it. We knew we had the backing of the American people. We had, I had our troops on our left and right. We believed in what we were doing. We thought you crossed a border and you put a threat to the globe's oil supply. We can argue whether or not that was always true or not, but that's what we believed. And we had that backing, and that was all true. And the morale was just through the roof. I can only imagine what it's like right now when they're saying, what? No one attacked any of us. We did the attacking. No one's behind us. We see stuff falling apart. And what in the hell do I have coming out of the White House? I can't even imagine fighting under those conditions.
Well, in fact, I shared that with a young friend of mine who just, he graduated West Point, 5 years ago, and then he just finished his commitment to the Army, and he's out now. But he's still in touch with buddies who are still in. And, the guy I was talking to is an officer, or a fairly senior officer, but he's dealing with lower level people. And he said it's the same thing. He's hearing the same thing from his buddies. So, it's anecdotal evidence, but we're getting it from a couple of different sources. And I don't hear everybody saying, oh man, they think this is great. We're doing wonderful. This couldn't be better. No, they don't see it. They don't see an exit. They see, we're trapped in a corner, and you got to say, how do we get out?
And we have to hope President Trump gets some sanity. That's not a good thing to base it on, but that's where we are.
Not holding my breath.
Well, thanks for coming on, Larry. As always, we're very grateful for your no kidding truth on all this.
Coffee. Follow me.